Third thing we try to do is we try to take notes and analyze the case thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly. So let's go to this for a second. If you're a good note taker, those notes then become the format, the structure. And I used to sometimes take these notes right into Word, or into whatever your word processing document or your doc. I would take notes sometimes either on a tablet or whatever. Those things became the rough outline then for what would eventually become a search warrant and become the file for the case. So the better my notes were in the beginning, the better my outlines were. The better my outlines were, the better my search warrants were. The better my search warrants were, the better the filing became. Does that make sense? It all starts in the beginning. This is what one of our notebooks looks like. So we have these small notebooks, and the police department would be on the front, and this was the outline we would use. And so this would kind of lock down all the basic elements of this notebook. And then what we would do is we would start to collect evidence and examine the evidence, right? And put that evidence together after we had pulled it all together, and we would build a case from this. Now, I want to show you something that became an important part of my note-taking process, okay? I've got this on the screen for you. I just want us to take a good look at this for a while. I'm going to show you something that what am I looking for? What am I taking notes of? What am I highlighting? What am I examining? Sometimes I'm examining simply statements made by criminals, by suspects. And when I'm doing that, I would, for example, I would say, hey, sit down, or maybe this happened back 30 years ago, or maybe he made a statement to someone 30 years ago. And I have the recorded interview, and it's transcribed now. So now I have the interview from 30 years ago in which the suspect is talking to a detective. Well, now I can analyze the statements of the suspect to see if I see any signs of deception, any indicators of deception. I'm trying to read, it's just called forensic statement analysis. And I'm going to teach you a little bit of it because I think you could actually apply this to the Gospels. And we are going to do that. So here's a statement here, for example. Now, what are we looking for here? What we're looking for are certain indicators of deception, certain key words, and we will then take colored pens or colored text, and we will color code the word so it starts to look like this. Certain things will be underlined, repeating words will be underlined sometimes. We're looking for certain characteristics of this statement, and then we'll start to make conclusions about these statements and try to kind of connect the dots. And what we're looking for are signs that maybe he is being deceptive to us, or maybe he'll even tell us. So, for example, if I was going to interview you contemporarily, if I was going to just interview you today, I might, before I began the interview, say to you, hey, do me a favor, take this piece of paper. I want you to write on the front of it everything you did yesterday, the day of the crime, from the time you got up in the morning to the time you went to bed. You can't turn the paper over. You got to use the front side of the page. It's got 24 lines. You got to use this ink pen. You can't use any other pen. And you can't use a pencil that you could erase. If you want to make a change, you can make a change, but you got to cross it out. Well, now you're going to write out your words for what you did yesterday. And if you're up for 12 hours between getting up and going to bed, that means you should have about 2 lines per hour, right? Because I've given you 24 lines. So now I can look at the pace at which you are writing out your day. Are you compressing time, expanding time? I can look at certain key things, and I'm looking to see if I see any signs of deception. When I was doing this as an investigator, I often would try to figure out what time of day he committed the crime, if he's our guy, based on his compression and expansion of time. So let's just take a look at how this might apply to the Gospels, because when I was first looking at the Gospels, this is the Bible I used. And you can kind of see this is my early Bible of the Gospel of Mark. And I would color code it. And I was using forensic statement analysis to go through this page by page to check and verify claims. What I was looking for here, to be honest with you, was I had heard early on that Papias claims that Mark's gospel is the memoir of Peter. If that's the case, I should see something forensically on the pages of Mark's gospel that would indicate to me that Peter is an influencer, that he is a source of information or had influence over Mark in one way or the other. So that's what I was looking for as I was going through Mark's gospel. So let's go ahead and tell you how you do this process. What are you looking for? What is it you are circling? Well, here's what you're circling, okay, as you kind of look at this. You are looking for the things that are optional, first of all, or in other words, where writers have choices, or where speakers who are being interviewed can make choices. because the choices I make will reveal something about me. So I'm really looking for those words or areas in the text where I have the most freedom to use language of one kind or another. And of course, I have freedom to do that with every word in the text, but some places are of more interest to me than others. Here's one. I am looking for how people will use proper nouns, like names, and pronouns. Let me give you an example of how you might say if this friend, somebody, an acquaintance, somebody we're investigating named Kathy, let's say, has lied to somebody, and now these witnesses, a friend of hers, maybe Kathy's been killed, who knows, but the point is, I want to know now something about Kathy, and she's a liar, she's lied in the past, so now one of the people, maybe somebody I'm investigating for her murder, is describing this to us and says, Kathy lied to us. This is one way you could say it. You see that on your screen. Kathy lied to us. Okay. Here's an alternative that could be used, though. Maybe they said it this way. That girl lied to us. You could say it this way. That crazy fool lied to us. Now, do you see what we've done here? There's choices that could be made here. And I'm really, all these sentences, all of these explain or describe Kathy. These are the words that are being substituted for just the proper noun, Kathy. But that would tell us something about, depending on what's used here, it's going to tell us either something about Kathy or about the person who's describing Kathy. Does that make sense? And I'm looking at that to see if this is the person I'm investigating for her murder, how she describes Kathy is going to matter to me. That makes sense? Something similar happens in Scripture. Here's a passage from Galatians. This is Paul says, here's what he says. I want you to look. We're looking for proper noun usage. Or is there a place where Paul slips out the proper noun and a proper name and uses a pronoun or some other description way to describe the person he's talking about. Then 3 years later, he says, I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. But I did not see any other of the apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Now, do you see what's happened here? In one place, he's used the proper noun or proper name of Cephas. Make sense? And you can see over here, this is James, the Lord's brother. Okay, are we clear on this so far? We've got Cephas and James, the Lord's brother. Now, if you're going to add the descriptor of the Lord's brother, why would you do that? Probably because there's maybe more than one James under consideration. So we're talking about James, the Lord's brother. Okay, got it. But see, even by adding the Lord's brother, we do know there's probably more than one James. If I didn't know anything else, I would guess there's probably more than one James. But let's go on a little further. We're still in Galatians. Now we're on chapter 2. Then after an interval of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along also. It was because of a revelation that I went up, and I submitted to them the gospel which I preached among the Gentiles. But I did so in private to those who were of reputation, for fear that I might be running or had run in vain. Now look what's happened here. That word them that I just highlighted on the page, he's talking about the same people he was talking about earlier, but now he's not using their proper names. He's using this word them. Here, those who were of reputation. He's talking about the same people. Okay, let's go a little further here. But not even Titus, who was with me, though he was a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. But it was because of the false brethren secretly brought in, who had sneaked in to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, in order to bring us into bondage. Okay, let's continue, same passage. But we did not yield in subjection to them for even an hour, so that the truth of the gospel would remain with you. But from those who were of high reputation, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Well, those who were of reputation contributed nothing to me. Do you see what we have here now? He's talking about the same two people. But he's now calling them those who are of high reputation. Let's take a look now at all the different ways that Paul has used to describe the same people. I've got a list here for you. Now, why would he do that? Now, I'm not going to make any inferences here. I'm just going to tell you that this is the kind of data I would be looking for in a criminal statement. Different ways in which the suspect I'm investigating would describe the victim, let's say, would describe a witness, let's say, because it's going to tell me something about the person who's describing the victim and maybe even about the relationship that person has with the victim. So for example, if he's recalling his relationship with his wife over 30 years, and as he's recalling his relationship, he's shifting the use of either proper names to certain kinds of pronouns, I can track that change to see if the relationship is strong, if it's deteriorating. Here, I'm not going to make an inference about this passage, but I do think we have to do something with the fact that the way he's describing these men changes throughout this passage. You can make your own inference at this point, but this is the kind of data I'm looking for, and I'm applying this now to the Gospels, or to this case, to a letter of Paul. I'm also looking for adjectives and adverbs, because when you don't need to use an adjective or an adverb, these are always optional. I can say, this is my bottle of water. I could say, this is my crunchy bottle of water. I can say, this is my lukewarm bottle of water. All those adjectives I'm using to describe, they're unnecessary, and if I'm going to use those kinds of adjectives because they are optional words, I can assess them as an investigator because they're optional. So let's take a look again at the statements related to Kathy. Kathy lied to us. Pretty simple statement. But they might say it differently. They might say, Kathy maliciously lied to us. Okay, I'm kind of inflecting that. Probably shouldn't do that, but you get the idea. Or they could say, redheaded Kathy vindictively told us another malicious lie. And I doubt that anyone talks that way in real life, but I just wanted to give you the kinds of different ways that Kathy lying could be described by somebody. Now, why is that important? Let's take a look at this a little closer here. You see here that these are the optional adverbs and adjectives. Redheaded is the adjective. It's a malicious lie, and she vindictively told us this. She maliciously told us this. These are the kinds of adjectives and adverbs. Now, I think we have a right when anyone uses an optional word to ask questions. I'm not going to make an inference yet. I just want to stay in the idea that I'm collecting evidence. These words count. I can make an inference. So for here, for example, why is she using this word maliciously? As opposed to what? A malicious lie? Is she saying it's something different than a useful or a lie that might spare someone's feelings? No, this was a malicious lie. There's no good way to look at this. This was malicious. Is that what she means by using that word? Possibly. Possibly. Why are you using the descriptor redheaded? Is there more than one Kathy in this? Is that why you're describing her as the redheaded one? Or are you saying that because you just don't like redheads? I don't know. I'd have to do some more investigation. Is that a pejorative? Are you using it as a pejorative or just as a descriptor? I wouldn't know that, at least at first, until I did some more investigation. How about this? Vindictively. Well, why are you saying that? As a matter of fact, that word vindictively causes me to want to ask another question. If she's vindictive, well, why would I want to know what was done to her first? As a matter of fact, the use of this optional word is going to cause me to ask another question. So do you see how important the optional... Let's go to Scripture. Let's take a look at how we might apply this to Scripture. Here's Luke chapter 1, verse 1 to 4. I will use this later when making a case for the resurrections. I'm just building the foundation of our knowledge base so we can make this case. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, Luke says in first chapter of Luke, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having followed all the things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have the certainty concerning the things you have been taught. Take a look at that sentence there for a second. And if you look at it, you'll see that there are 3 optional words, which I have now highlighted in yellow. I'm only going to stay in that one sentence for now. I just want you to see these are important words to me. We'll talk about more of this in the next session, but these are words that don't need to be used. They don't. He could have said, having followed all things for some time past. He didn't say that. He said, having followed all things closely for some time past. Okay. To write an orderly account for you. He could have just said, to write an account for you. He says, most excellent Theophilus. He could easily have said Theophilus. By the way, he says that when he reintroduces Theophilus in the first chapter of Acts. Remember, Luke, Acts are all one volume. I might understand why then I would leave out most excellent when I mentioned him the second time. I've already introduced him to the reader as most excellent. So or if he's writing to Theophilus, he's already seen me apply his title in the first utterance. But you get the idea here that I'm now looking to say, well, why would you include these optional words? Why would you say she did it maliciously? Why would you call her a redhead? Why would you say she was being vindictive? Why would you use closely, orderly, most excellent? These are optional words. I always ask those kinds of questions about adjectives and adverbs. Now let's go ahead and look at one of these, just drill down on these. I'll do more of these in the next couple of sessions. But here, he's using this word for orderly. I wrote an orderly account for you. Remember, sometimes when words are like signposts. For example, if I was to drive up and park on a curb and I saw this signpost, it says no parking anytime. Okay, so why would you have to put a parking sign, a no parking sign at a curb? Well, because someone's been parking there. Because the opposite thing has been occurring. Don't walk your dog without a leash here. It's because someone's been walking their dog without a leash, and you have to put a sign there to say the opposite, okay? That kind of happens in statements from suspects, too. Why would you have to say that? Because the opposite, you're trying to distinguish it from the opposite behavior? Because somebody's been doing the opposite? Here we have this idea that there's an orderly account, Luke says he wrote. Is that because there's a disorderly account that he's trying to compare it to? Is he trying to distinguish his account from another account that's not in the right order? Because this word means correct chronological order in Greek. But if it's an orderly account, don't you assume an account about the life of Jesus is in the correct chronological order? Why in the world would you need to tell me that? I'm assuming that. It starts with his birth. It ends with his death and resurrection and ascension. I'm guessing it's in the right order in the middle. But no, he's telling me this is in the right order. That makes me wonder, okay, is there some other account out there that's not in the right order? Well, sure enough, Papias tells us that's true. So Papias, an early bishop in the church, says that there is a disorderly account out there. It's called the Gospel of Mark. Because Mark, he says, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately, though not indeed in order, whatsoever he remembered of the things said or done by Christ. So he says there's another account out there that's not indeed in order. Well, that helps me then, right? Because I'm guessing there's another account out there. And Luke is writing his account, responding to something that preceded him that was not necessarily orderly, and telling us that his is. This could even help me understand which of these two accounts came first, right? A simple word leads us to other reasonable inferences. I'm also looking, though, in forensic statement analysis for a contraction or expansion of time. Let me give it to you this way. Okay, so my victim died yesterday, and this guy I'm talking to right now is my key suspect. And I asked him what he did yesterday, and he could answer, what did you do at dinner time? Because I know she was killed at dinner time. So I'm going to ask him, okay, so tell me what happened yesterday. What were you doing? What did you have for dinner yesterday? He could respond quite simply. He could just say it this way. I'll put it on your screen here. I ate pizza with Kathy. Okay, great. Wonderful. He may not say it this way. Maybe he says it this way. I drove to Kathy's from Pizza Hut. I took Hawthorne Boulevard. We ate breadsticks with our pizza. There's a lot of stuff in there now that I didn't need to know that he's included. He's expanded both of these accounts, by the way. I ate pizza with Kathy, and all that second part cover the exact same amount of time. But one of these is very brief, and one of these is a little bit longer. What if you said this? I drove from Kathy's to Pizza Hut. I decided to take Hawthorne. The roads were a bit slick from the rain. I don't typically take Hawthorne, but I figured the traffic would be heavy on Sepulveda. I was wrong. When I got to Carson Street, the light took forever to change. I could see the people in the car next to me were getting really impatient. I thought for sure they might just blow through the red light, but eventually it changed, and I drove to Kathy's house. Oh, yeah, I did stop at the corner and retrieve my phone text before I got there. I was late, but she loved the pizza. Well, really? Okay, so here I've got either a compression of time or an expansion of time. That's going to cause me to ask questions. Look, if I just asked you to write the whole day out, but when you got to these 30 minutes, it ends up being the War and Peace, then I'm going to be wondering what is going on there. Why would you feel compelled to give me that much information? If I just told you to write out your entire day, and then you happen to do this at the same time that my victim was killed, I'm thinking, dude, I think you're covering something there, because why would you feel compelled to account for every split second of your day at coincidentally the same time in which my victim was killed? I'm looking at these, and I'll highlight this for you. I am looking here in the second sentence rather. this is the first sentence with all of that additional. You see the I ate pizza with Kathy is in there somewhere, but it's kind of embedded in all this additional data. And this one, it's even worse, right? The second one, I ate pizza with Kathy is kind of in there, but all that extra stuff was put in there. Now, when I see that happen, I think it's fair for me as an investigator to start asking some simple questions. So, for example, I might ask, well, does this guy always do this? If he talks briefly, if I actually expect to hear all of that, and I get something really brief, then I might ask, well, does he always talk that briefly? Or I might ask, well, okay, given that seems to be odd that he would expand like this, can we at least find out if there's anybody who saw him during this time? This might cause me to look for an additional source, an additional piece of corroborative evidence at the time in which he begins either to expand or contract, if that makes sense. And of course, remember, I'm looking at it in the context of the whole statement. Now, I also might say, well, has he been caught lying about something else that would also cause me to doubt him here? So I can weigh these factors in to see how should I infer that? Should I infer that as just his talkative? Or should I infer that as he's covering something or making an excuse? I'd have to ask those other three questions to get any closer to this. Now, I say that because let's now turn a corner and go toward the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew says, He, Jesus, opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That's a lot that Matthew gives us. He isn't the only person who has an account here of this event. Take a look at now what Luke does with it. Matthew is the most extensive of all these. Luke decides for some reason to compress the account. Here's Luke's version. Take a look quickly. This is Matthew's. Now look what happens to it. This is Luke's. Same data in some places, but some of that stuff's been taken out. Mark? Want to see Mark's version of this? Check it out. Yep, nothing. Nothing at all. How about John? John says, oh yeah, nothing. What in the world is going on with that? Well, how is it that John... Let's go back to Matthew's account for a second. Okay, so here's Matthew's. Okay, it's fair for me to ask this question, the same question I would ask of a suspect. Does this dude always do this? That's fair to ask. Do I have another account, another witness that can help me fill in the data or understand why he does this? Has he been caught lying somewhere else? Look, here's my point. In any event that leads to a supplemental report or to a documentation, here we've got an event that occurs, the ministry and preaching of Jesus, and it eventually gets recorded in our scripture. Now the question is, this is a timeline. You see the little ruler I put in place here? This is a timeline. What we have here is data and then a skip. And then some data. Not everything that occurs is recorded by every single eyewitness. Some people skip over some events and include others. The green is what's included. The red's what's been skipped over. I think it's fair to ask, why is this stuff missing? That's fair to ask. It's fair to ask of a suspect, by the way, too. Why are you skipping that stuff that you could tell me about? And of course, there's the green stuff. Why is this stuff included? Now, look, I will ask this question, but it doesn't always mean something nefarious is going on. Yes, it's possible. Take a look at our diagram here. It's possible that this stuff is included only and some stuff is missing because this person is trying to be deceptive. That is one way to infer what's happening. Sometimes that's the case, but I'm careful about this because I know. Now, by the way, as the skeptic, they look at this account and they say, oh, you know what? You got some stuff missing from this account and some stuff included from that account and other stuff's missing from this account. It's got to be bad. It's got to be nefarious. It's got to be deception. That is sometimes the case when I'm looking at an eyewitness or looking at a suspect who's giving me a statement. I'll grant you that. But most of the time, it's not deception. Most of the time when someone gives me details of an account and some stuff's included and some stuff is missing, it's one of these reasons I'm listing here. These lists, all of which begin with a P, so you can remember them. Yes, this is kind of like the latest Baptist message you heard at church. 3 points and a promise. Here it is. It's 5 points, all to start with P. This is a good, you can preach this. It's often a preference on the part of the person reporting it. It's some perception that he makes based on where he maybe is in the room. It's some set of priorities he holds in his worldview. It's some purpose that he has when he's giving you the statement. If you would have refined your questions and eliminated the purpose he's trying to use, you would have got it differently. Or it's some perspective that he holds. So I just want you to be careful. We can look at this word forensic statement analysis, and we can collect the data of what's compressed, what's not compressed, all those optional words I've talked about. But be careful about your inferences unless you can make it from multiple accounts, because often what somebody would call deception is really one of those other P's. Make sense? We're almost done. Let's take a look at apparent illogical or nonsensical information. This is another thing we're looking for in forensic statement analysis. There are times where this person just says something that like, what? Are you like, this makes no sense. Now, there's always going to be something that seems to be illogical or nonsensical, and you got to figure out how to make sense of it, if it is even possible. So, for example, let's take a look at a report. We looked at some eyewitnesses earlier. Let's bring those same eyewitnesses back in again. Now we have 4 eyewitnesses who are describing something on the part of a party that took place in which, well, I'll just give the first account. This witness says, you know, they brought anchovy pizza to the party, even though everyone hates anchovies. Well, that makes okay. What's the deal there? Why would they bring anchovy pizza to the party if everyone hates anchovies? And that's nonsense. It makes no sense. Why would you do that? And this, at least if nothing else, this begs for better explanation. Well, then it turns out you keep on interviewing witnesses, and you find out somebody else offers some little detail, like this guy. Well, because of Kathy, they brought the anchovy pizza to the party. Okay, well, that helps me a little bit. I mean, I get it. No one likes anchovies. Yet, they brought anchovy, and I guess it's Kathy whose idea it was, but it still doesn't explain why they would do it. Just who did it, really, is all that's being explained here. Now let's go to a third person. Well, yeah, Kathy lied and said that everyone liked anchovies. Okay, now I've got a little bit better explanation. I understand now that anchovy pizza was brought to the party, which makes no sense that everyone hates anchovies, but it was Kathy's idea, and she accomplished it by lying and saying that everyone... But still, I have an open question. Why would she do that? Why would anyone do that? Fourth witness comes in and says, well, yeah, Kathy's obnoxious nature got them all in trouble. So there's something about Kathy that's just generally obnoxious. I'm not even sure it's malicious at this point, but now I have a more robust explanation for why something crazy, like people bringing anchovy pizza to a location where nobody likes anchovy pizza, well, apparently it's Kathy who was being obnoxious who decided to do this. Now this kind of comes, now why do I say that? Because something happens in every account where you're going to need additional players, additional sources of information to make sense of what otherwise might seem like a nonsensical issue or a nonsensical situation. Here, for example, we have one account in which Jesus is in front of Caiaphas, and it says that the high priest tore his robes and said, he's blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? Behold, you've now heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists. And others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, you Christ. Who was the one who hit you? Now, that's really subtle, but it is confusing, right? Because how hard would it be to answer that question? Why would it be prophecy for Jesus to be able to simply identify the person who just smacked them? It was you, you knucklehead. And to knock that off, too. That hurt. No, he's not going to. It wouldn't be any prophecy anyway. He's standing right in front of you. He spat in your face. He beat you with his fists. And then he says, prophesy to us? Who hit you? This is kind of a nonsensical statement, but of course additional information will help, and here's the additional account. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking and beating him, and they blindfolded him? Well, the first account didn't say that. And so although this makes no sense unless you have the second account. But now the second account in place, we can say, oh yeah, now this makes sense. This is prophecy because he couldn't see who hit him because he was blindfolded at the time. Now this makes better sense.